Imagine walking into a forgotten church deep in the woods. The air is thick with rot, the stained glass shattered, and in front of it, a black well yawns open into endless darkness. You lean over, listening, and from below comes a sound click, steady, unnatural, like someone tapping stone with a stick from the pit of hell itself. You should turn back, but you don't. You step inside. The floorboards groan, the walls whisper, and from the basement, a voice calls out in broken words. A voice that shouldn't exist. Now picture sneaking onto farmland, littered with luxury cars and rotting sheds, only to see a man with no face sitting silently with a black cat, while a woman with burning eyes sprints toward you. Or standing on the edge of a Texas quarry, realizing someone is firing live rounds at you just for stepping foot on the wrong side of a fence. Or finding 5 chairs arranged in a perfect circle in the basement of a mansion abandoned for decade shares that look like they were used last night. Welcome to The Price Paid. Subscribe now, if you dare to keep listening. There are some places that seem to exist outside of time, places that feel as if they were never meant to be found. For a certain kind of person, those forgotten spaces call out louder than anything else. The story begins with someone who had always been drawn to places where no one else dared to go. From a young age, solitude had been his constant companion. He wasn't the kind of kid who joined sports teams or surrounded himself with friends. Instead, his world revolved around screens, video games, and long, lonely walks that carried him further into silence. What started as harmless wanderings soon morphed into an obsession and addiction to slipping into places that were off limits. Cemeteries at night, abandoned schools, forgotten hospitals, places where no one was supposed to be. While most people would feel a shiver at the thought of being alone in those dark corners of the world, he felt a thrill, almost a sense of belonging. Once he got his driver's license, the possibilities multiplied. Google Earth became his hunting ground. He would scan endless miles of countryside, searching for structures half hidden in overgrown woods, or leaning in on themselves from years of neglect. He made lists of potential destinations, each one a possible treasure waiting to be discovered. Some turned out to still be lived in, awkward encounters that sent him hurrying away. But more often than not, his instincts led him to buildings left to rot. He never stopped to consider why those places were abandoned, or what danger might linger there. It was never about the story behind the place. It was about the exploration, the feeling of stepping into a forgotten world. One particular entry on his list took him far off the beaten path. The day was overcast, the kind of day where the woods seem too still, where sound doesn't travel the way it should. He parked his car on a dirt road and set off on foot, his boots crunching over dry leaves as he made his way deeper into the forest. The walk took about 10 minutes, though each step seemed to draw him further from the safety of the world he knew. Along the way, he noticed rusted garbage cans, scraps of metal, the kind of debris that suggested human activity long ago. And then he saw a small clearing, and in the middle, a church that looked like it had been forgotten by God himself. It was a sad thing to look at. The roof sagged, the walls were eaten by rot, and the windows that had once held stained glass were shattered. In front of the church stood an old stone well, the kind you only see in fairy tales or nightmares. He approached it slowly, curious to see whether it had been sealed. It hadn't. The opening yawned wide, a mouth into pure darkness. He leaned over, his flashlight beam barely touching the void, and that was when he heard it. A sound echoing from deep below. Click. 2 seconds later, click. The sound was precise, mechanical in rhythm, but hollow and wrong. It wasn't dripping water, it wasn't an animal, it was deliberate, like someone was waiting. He should have walked away then, but he didn't. He stared into that black throat of earth until the rhythm seemed to seep into his mind, lulling him into stillness. It was only after shaking himself from that trance that he realized how long he had been standing there, listening to the steady tapping from a place no human voice should reach. He turned his attention to the church itself. The porch creaked as he stepped onto it, the boards sagging beneath his weight. The doors hung open, one leaning awkwardly on its hinges. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the scent of decay. The light filtering through the broken windows gave the place a strange kind of beauty. Pews lay overturned, some missing entirely, as if ripped out in haste. The pulpit still stood, crooked but defiant, a monument to sermons no one remembered. He raised his flashlight and began exploring, snapping a few pictures on his camera. The silence inside pressed down heavy, as though the building itself resented his intrusion. At the back of the main room, an arched doorway led to a narrow hallway. He followed it, boots crunching over fallen plaster, until he reached a stairway descending into darkness. Normally, this was the moment he lived for. Basements promised secrets, untouched corners, maybe something worth photographing. But this time was different. The open door, the heavy dark beyond it gave him a chill. Still, curiosity won. Step by step, he descended. The wood groaned under him, and by the 7th step, it betrayed him completely. His foot crashed through the rotten board, sending him sprawling into the dirt and junk below. Pain shot up his spine as he landed hard, his flashlight skittering away. He cursed under his breath, scrambling for the light. That was when he heard it. A voice. It was faint, high-pitched, like that of a child or a woman. The words were jumbled, impossible to understand, except for one. A clear, soft hello. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but he couldn't move. His flashlight beam swept across the room, showing nothing more than broken furniture, stone walls, and dirt floors. Then his light caught something else tunnel, carved by hand, rough and uneven. And from that tunnel, the voice continued, garbled nonsense laced with that eerie attempt at human speech. His flashlight flickered. His heart stopped. He slapped the casing until the beam returned, the sound echoing in the tunnel louder than he intended. And then the gibberish stopped. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Click. 2 seconds. Click. The sound from the well, the same rhythm, but now it was here, inside the tunnel, echoing closer and closer. Panic broke through his fear. He turned and scrambled up the stairs, pulling himself along the railings to avoid the broken step. His flashlight slipped from his hand, clattering into the dark. But he didn't care. He ran, crashing through the hallway, bursting into the main room, and sprinting out the front doors. Outside, the clearing was unnervingly silent. Not just the absence of voices or clicks, but silence in its purest, most terrifying form. No wind, no birds, not even the rustle of leaves. He stopped at the well one last time, peering into the darkness below. Nothing, just blackness. And yet the silence felt heavy, as if something waited for him to lean closer again. He didn't. He turned and bolted through the woods, reaching his car breathless and shaken. The rest of the day's exploration plans were abandoned. On the drive home, he sat in silence. No music, no thoughts, except the steady memory of that clicking sound. The kind of sound that doesn't fade from your mind, the kind that feels like it follows you, even when you've left the woods far behind. Some trespasses don't just risk being caught by a landowner. Some open doors that should never have been touched. Some trespassing stories are built on nothing more than thrill-seeking, kids sneaking through fences just to laugh about it later. But others cross a boundary into something far more disturbing, something that burns itself into memory and never loosens its grip. What happened on a sprawling piece of farmland to 3 young friends was one of those encounters, the kind you don't shake off no matter how many years pass. It started almost playfully. They were bored, looking for something new, and thought it would be fun to slip back onto the farmland they had already been chased off of once before. The farmer's dog had caught them during a fishing trip, and the owner himself had threatened to call the police. That warning alone should have been enough. But youth feeds on recklessness, and so the next day, just before dusk, they returned. The land stretched on for acres, rolling fields that swallowed sound and made every step feel as if it carried them further away from safety. Google Maps had given them only a rough idea of the layout, but walking it in person was different. Trees pressed in thick on all sides, shadows gathering quickly as the sun sank lower. They reminded each other they should be out before dark, but that reminder quickly dissolved when the excitement of discovery took over. At first, the property seemed harmless. Horses grazed lazily in the fields, their presence oddly out of place on land so vast and strangely empty. No cows, no pigs, no chickens, nothing but horses. They laughed about it, comparing it to other farms they knew. But beneath that laughter was unease. This land didn't feel right.
Go!
It wasn't just the size of it, it was the silence, broken only by the occasional snort of a horse, or the crunch of their own boots on the ground. Then they saw the house. From a distance, it looked worn down, but as they drew closer, the strangeness of the property revealed itself in layers. There were cars, dozens of them, scattered around the yard and hidden in sheds. Not junk cars, but expensive, exotic machines. Corvettes, Bentleys, Ferraris, Range Rovers. Some stripped for parts, some intact, but gathering dust as if forgotten. The boys whispered to each other in disbelief. No ordinary farmer-owned cars like these. The word chop shop crossed their minds, whispered like a secret too dangerous to say out loud. They edged closer, nerves on fire. One of them pulled out his phone, recording shaky video of the surreal display. Then, curiosity dragged them further. An RV sat near the house, run down and grimy, but not empty. Inside, they found signs of someone living there, fishing rods, bedding, food that wasn't yet spoiled. It wasn't just a stash yard. Someone called this place home. That realization cracked through their nerves like thunder. Trespassing had gone from mischievous to dangerous. Still, they pushed on. There was a shed, the kind that leaned crooked, its boards soft with rot. Inside, the stench hit them first. A foul, suffocating odor of decay. They gagged, joked nervously about a body hidden somewhere inside, but none of them wanted to linger long enough to find out. As they stumbled back into the open air, a new sound carried across the property, the slam of a gate. It echoed, metal against metal, sharp enough to slice through their laughter. Their eyes darted to the distant road, where a van pulled up, headlights piercing the gloom. Dusk was settling, shadows stretching long, and now they were being watched. Instinct told them to run, but instead, some insane curiosity pulled them deeper into the property, away from the obvious exit. That was when they reached the far end of the farmland, where the trees closed in again, and stumbled upon something worse than the smell in the shed. A massive camper, nearly swallowed by vines, sat slumped against the earth. It looked ancient, unmoved for decades. Nearby, a jet ski rotted under a net of weeds, a bizarre pairing that added to the sense of wrongness. They tried the camper door, but the groan of hinges made them stop short. Something about this place didn't just feel abandoned, it felt staged, as though every object had been left here on purpose. One of them spotted a cooler sitting just inside the vegetation, the lid barely visible through the green. Its placement was too deliberate, too clean compared to the decay around it. Jokes flew again. Maybe it was filled with beer, maybe a body, but when the smell hit them, there was no laughter. The stink of rot clung to their clothes, seeping into their skin. They backed away quickly, fighting the urge to open the cooler and confirm their worst fears. It was then, trying to laugh off the unease, that one of them climbed a rock for a better view. His friends teased him until he froze, his expression draining of color. He wouldn't speak, wouldn't explain. When the second boy climbed up, he understood why. 50 feet away sat a man at a table. A black cat curled lazily in front of him. The sight alone was eerie, but it was his face, or rather, the absence of one, that shattered their sense of reality. His head was pale, smooth, and featureless. No eyes, no nose, no mouth, nothing. Just a blank mask of flesh. And yet, they all swore he was staring at them. Beside him stood a woman. She had eyes, burning and sharp, and when they met, she moved. She didn't shout, didn't hesitate, she sprinted, angling through the vegetation to cut them off. Panic exploded through the group. They ran, stumbling through brush that clawed at their clothes, their breath ragged. Behind them, the sounds grew, footsteps pounding the earth, shrieks that twisted between human and animal. Horses whinnied and stamped, the sound of hooves mixing with the chaos. Though whether the animals were panicking or being driven, they couldn't tell. Every rustle in the trees felt like pursuit. Every crack of a branch was a reminder that something was closing in. They kept running, barely daring to look back, until finally the woods broke and the familiar landmarks of the property's edge came into view. Even then, they felt watched. That night, none of them could sleep. The image of the faceless man seared itself into their memories, impossible to rationalize. Maybe it had been a mask. Maybe bandages. Maybe their fear twisted reality. But no matter how they tried to explain it away, one truth remained. They had stepped into something they were never supposed to see. And once you've seen a face that doesn't exist, you can't ever unsee it. There are rules to trespassing, unspoken but understood by anyone who has ever stepped past a fence or ignored a no-entry sign. Most of the time, the worst that can happen is being yelled at, chased off, maybe threatened with a call to the police. But in certain places, the consequences can be much more final. In Texas, where property rights are enforced with more than words, crossing the wrong line can mean facing a gun barrel. A group of teenagers learned that lesson the hard way at a quarry they thought would be nothing more than an adventure spot. The quarry had become a local legend thanks to YouTube videos of cliff diving. It looked like the perfect place to test their courage, with cliffs of varying heights and deep water that shimmered blue in the sun. For 3 friends, Miles, Josh, and the narrator, it was irresistible. They had heard the warnings, seen the signs that read no trespassing and blasting zone. Even the crudely painted cardboard warning that declared trespassers would be shot on sight. But when you're 16 or 17, warnings blur into dares. They parked the car, laughed nervously at the signs, and began their hike in. The place had an atmosphere from the very beginning. The dirt road twisted between rusted-out buildings that looked like they hadn't been touched in years. Every corner felt like it hid something. They noticed a truck drive past slowly, the driver's blank stare following them until it disappeared. That should have been enough to make them turn back, but instead, they pressed forward until the water opened before them, vast and glittering under the Texas sun. At first, it was everything they hoped. They jumped from cliffs, the splash echoing against stone walls. They laughed, dared each other to go higher, and for a while, it felt like the warnings had been nothing more than empty threats. Then came the interruption of Black Hummer rolling down the path, stopping close enough for them to hear the engine idle. A woman rolled down her window, her face tight with anger. Her voice cut across the water like a knife. "What are you doing on my property?" They tried to play innocent, insisting they thought it was public land. But she wasn't fooled. Her eyes narrowed. Her hand gripped her phone. And then came the words that froze their blood. "John, get the gun." For a moment, time seemed to stall. The boys exchanged frantic looks, their laughter gone, replaced by raw fear. The woman demanded they follow her to the gate, her vehicle crawling just ahead of them as if daring them to make a run for it. They apologized over and over, swearing they'd leave and never come back. Eventually, she let them go, warning them that the police were on their way. They sprinted to their car, not stopping until the road stretched behind them, and vowed never to set foot there again. But fear fades and recklessness returns. Months later, the narrator's friend Miles asked if they should go back. The story of the Hummer had become almost funny, the way dangerous experiences sometimes become when you retell them enough times. This time, they brought a bigger Group 5 and total figuring safety in numbers would protect them. They parked farther away, near an old church to avoid being spotted, then crept back toward the quarry. The day was clear, the water calm, and for nearly an hour it felt like they'd gotten away with it. Then a silver van pulled up at the far end of the path, just close enough to keep them in sight. At first they ignored it, thinking it was just another vehicle passing through. But when the driver didn't move, unease settled in. They began packing up, preparing to leave. That was when the first gunshot shattered the air. The sound ricocheted off the quarry walls, sharp and violent. They froze for a heartbeat before instinct took over. They ran. Another gunshot followed, closer this time, and then another. Each shot rang out like a hammer strike, pounding against their skulls as they sprinted toward the fence. The exit wasn't close. 300 yards stretched between them and the road, every step heavy with the fear that the next bullet would find its mark. The narrator led, heart pounding so hard it drowned out everything else. Behind him, Aiden gasped for breath, nearly stumbling. More shots cracked through the air, echoing too close. They dared a glance back, but whoever was firing stayed hidden, using the landscape to his advantage. It was a nightmare made real no-face to their pursuer, only the relentless echo of gunfire urging them forward. They reached the fence, scrambling over it in a panic. The sharp metal cut into their hands, but adrenaline dulled the sting. They landed hard on the dirt road, breaths ragged, legs burning, but they couldn't stop. And then, as if fate intervened, salvation appeared. The same man who had warned them earlier about the Black Hummer pulled up in a white truck. Without hesitation, they begged for a ride. He opened the door, and they piled in, hearts still hammering as the shots faded behind them. The truck carried them off the property, and only once the quarry was miles behind did they allow themselves to breathe. Laughter bubbled up, not because anything was funny, but because terror often leaves no other release. Still, none of them suggested going back. This time, the vow stuck. They had crossed the line, and the land had answered with violence. To this day, the narrator thinks about what would have happened if that truck hadn't been there. Would they have made it out? Or would the quarry have claimed them as another warning for the next trespassers bold enough to ignore the signs? The truth is that some fences aren't just boundaries of land, they're boundaries of survival. And in Texas, when a sign says, "Trespassers will be shot," it isn't always a bluff. There is something uniquely unsettling about a house that looks as though its inhabitants simply vanished. Not a house that crumbles into ruin slowly, piece by piece, but one where life seems to have stopped mid-step, leaving everything behind as though time itself froze. For two cousins with a shared passion for urban exploration, the mansion by Lake Harlow was the ultimate test of nerve. They had explored factories,
There have been many
schools,
sightings,
even
I admit,
farmhouses, ready to
but no
collapse,
hard
but nothing
evidence.
compared to the legend of the house on the shore. The property was well known among locals, if only as a shadow whispered about in rumor. From the road, you could sometimes catch a glimpse through the trees of a massive structure with tall windows and a wraparound porch, its iron gates bent inward years ago. No one lived there. No one had for decades. People claimed a wealthy family had once owned it, disappearing overnight without taking so much as a family photo. Others suggested darker possibilities. Cult activity, murders, something unspeakable hidden in its past. Whatever the truth, the house had been left to decay, standing like a monument to secrets no one wanted to touch. On the day they finally decided to go, the weather matched the mood. The sky was heavy and gray, clouds unmoving, as though the world itself held its breath. They parked far away, at a hiking trail, and approached through the woods. The closer they came, the larger the house grew. It wasn't just big, it was monstrous. A 3-story behemoth rising above the trees, its skin peeling, its bones sagging but still unbroken. The back door yielded easily, swinging open with a groan. At once, the air changed. It was still, almost too still, and thick with the smell of dust and lake water. The kitchen was the first room they saw, and it was like walking into a frozen moment. Dishes were stacked neatly on the counter. A coffee cup sat by the sink, a ring of dried residue clinging to the porcelain. The calendar on the wall still hung open to May of 1997. It was as if the people who lived here had planned to come back at any moment, but never did. Room by room, the mansion revealed itself. The living room still held couches, draped in sheets yellowed with age. The fireplace had ash inside, as though the last fire burned not decades, but days ago. Along the hall, family portraits lined the wall, smiling faces captured at barbecues, Christmas gatherings, vacations. Yet the photographs themselves had decayed, sun bleaching the faces until they were almost ghostly white. The effect was unnerving, like looking at people who no longer quite existed. Upstairs, things grew stranger. One bedroom was perfectly neat, the bed made tight, but every drawer in the dresser yawned open and empty. Another room had a floor completely covered in newspapers, each unfolded to the classified section. Every circled ad was from the same week in July 1997, each one related to private sales. It was too specific, too deliberate. And then came the master bedroom. Heavy curtains blocked out all light, and when pulled back, revealed windows boarded over from the inside. The closet door was secured with a padlock, rusted but unbroken, and deep scratches in the floor showed that something heavy had once been dragged toward either away from it. They debated forcing the lock, but caution won out. The thought of breaking into that closet, of finding what was hidden there, seemed too much even for them. Instead, Ryan suggested the basement. The door was tucked into a narrow hallway off the kitchen. When they opened it, a rush of cool, damp air rolled up, carrying the sharp tang of mildew. The stairs creaked under their weight, each step groaning as though warning them to turn back. The basement stretched wide, stone walls sweating with moisture. Wooden shelves lined the sides, filled with little more than rusted cans and scraps of nothing. But in the center of the room stood 5 chairs. They were old, mismatched, but arranged in a perfect circle. Unlike everything else in the house, they weren't covered in dust. Their seats looked freshly used, the wood faintly polished by recent contact. The cousins froze, their flashlights casting long shadows over the eerie arrangement. 1,000 questions pressing at once. Who had been sitting there? What had they been doing? Why did the rest of the house scream abandonment while this one detail felt alive? Before they could speak, another sound shattered the silence. A door closing. It was unmistakable, sharp, and deliberate. Footsteps followed, slow but heavy, moving across the floor directly above them. They killed their lights instantly, standing in suffocating darkness, ears straining. The footsteps stopped, then started again, closer, pacing toward the hallway above the basement door. Their hearts pounded. They had seen no cars outside, no signs of life. They had been certain they were alone, and yet someone was up there, moving with purpose. The footsteps reached the basement door. The handle rattled. Terror surged through them. Ryan grabbed his cousin's arm, pulling him toward the far end of the basement. There, a small ground-level window sat broken, half hidden by a rotting shutter. It was barely large enough, but it was their only way out. The narrator went first, scraping his jacket on broken glass as he squeezed through, dropping into damp soil outside. Ryan followed, and without a word, they ran. They sprinted through the woods, lungs burning, not daring to look back until they had put hundreds of yards between themselves and the house. When they finally glanced over their shoulders, the sight that met them etched itself into memory forever. The basement door stood open, and in its frame was a figure. It was tall, too far away to make out details, but its head tilted slightly, as though watching them. Motionless, silent. They didn't stop running until they reached the car. On the ride home, they barely spoke, both replaying every detail in silence. The chairs, the footsteps, the locked closet, the figure at the door. Weeks later, Ryan posted about the house in a local Facebook group, asking if anyone knew its history. The replies were predictable rumors, speculation, nothing solid. But one man, older, claimed he had seen people at the house himself. Squatters, maybe. Yet even he admitted there was no explanation for the circle of chairs. And that was the detail that stuck, the image that refused to fade. 5 chairs, waiting in a basement that should have been empty, waiting for something no one should ever witness. Some people believe that trespassing is harmless a thrill, a test of courage, a way to escape the ordinary world and step into places most would never dare. But these stories remind us that the cost of crossing forbidden thresholds can be far greater than a night in jail or a fine. Sometimes the danger is human, and sometimes it is something far older, far darker, something that defies explanation. The church in the woods was not just a crumbling ruin. It was a place where the earth itself whispered back, where a well breathed with clicks that echoed through tunnels carved by unseen hands. What spoke from the darkness was not human, but it wanted to be heard. The farmland, littered with luxury cars and rotting sheds, revealed that trespassing doesn't always uncover silence. Sometimes exposes you to people who were never meant to be seen. A faceless man and a woman, with eyes like fire, reminded those boys that there are places where the living and the unexplainable overlap. The quarry in Texas taught another lesson, one that cuts close to reality. Sometimes the threat is not supernatural, but brutally human. Trespass in the wrong place, and you may find yourself hunted, bullets chasing your every step. And then there was the mansion on the lake, a house left suspended in time, where a circle of chairs whispered of rituals that had not ended, where footsteps still echoed, long after the family who lived there had disappeared. Together, these 4 stories share a single truth. When you trespass, you don't just cross into another piece of land, you cross into someone else's world. Maybe that someone is a landowner with a gun, maybe a secret you were never meant to see, or maybe something that was waiting deep in the shadows long before you arrived. Curiosity can be intoxicating, but curiosity can also be fatal. So the next time you find yourself tempted to climb a fence, to push through a broken door, or to follow a path into the woods where no one goes anymore, remember this: the price of entering may be more than you are willing to pay, because sometimes you don't get to choose what follows you back out. Welcome to the price paid. If you want more true horror, more tales of shadows and silence, of doors that never should have opened, subscribe now. Enter at your own risk.